If you think modern warfare was shaped by jets and missiles, you have never heard the sound of a Huey. The UH-1 did not just fly missions. It defined an entire generation. Over 16,000 were built. Over 7,000 were deployed to Southeast Asia. Its rotor sound became the most recognized mechanical noise of the 20th century. Generals called it indispensable. Pilots called it a legend. Enemies called it unstoppable. Here's why the Huey remains the most iconic war machine ever constructed. In 1955, the United States Army issued a contract to Bell Helicopter for something that had never existed before: a turbine-powered utility helicopter. Every helicopter flying at that point ran on piston engines. They were loud, mechanically unreliable, in extreme heat and altitude, and limited in what they could carry. The Korean War had shown the value of the helicopter in medevac roles, but the machines doing that work were underpowered and fragile. The Army wanted something fundamentally different. Bell's engineers had a different idea. The prototype, designated the XH-40, made its first flight in October 1956. It flew on a Lycoming T-53 turbine engine, a jet engine, not a piston, lighter, more powerful, more reliable at altitude. That single engineering decision changed everything. The Army called it the UH-1 Iroquois. The crews who flew it called it something else. The designation HU-1, which stood for Helicopter Utility 1, compressed into a single word as soon as anyone said it out loud. Huey. The nickname stuck from day one, outlasting even the official redesignation to UH-1 in 1962, and it still has not gone away. It entered United States Army service in 1959. The Lycoming T-53L13 engine produced 1,400 shaft horsepower, more than anything flying in that utility role. Rotor diameter, 48 feet. Maximum takeoff weight, 9,500 pounds. Top speed, 127 miles per hour. Faster than any utility helicopter of its time. It could carry up to 14 troops in the troop transport role, or 6 stretchers in medevac configuration, and crews could reconfigure between the two in the field. That wasn't a feature, that was the whole idea. The weapons loadout matched the airframe's flexibility. Standard configuration: twin 7.62mm M60 machine guns mounted at the doors. 70mm Hydra rocket pods were capable of carrying up to 38 rockets in a dual-pod loadout. The M134 minigun variant, fitted on later gunship builds, fired at 6,000 rounds per minute. 6,000. That's 100 rounds every second. Whatever the Huey flew toward had very little time to respond. Here's what most coverage doesn't explain. The Huey wasn't one thing, it was everything, and that's what made it dangerous. The Army arrives in Vietnam with a problem that no aircraft in its inventory was built to solve. The terrain is a combination of dense jungle, flooded lowlands, and steep hill country with almost no roads. Ground movement is slow, predictable, and exposed. Supply lines break under pressure. Wounded soldiers can't get to hospitals in time. A soldier hit in World War II waited on average several days before reaching a surgical facility. The mortality rate among the wounded in Korea was 2.5 in every 100 casualties. Vietnam would be different because the Huey existed. Approximately 7,000 Hueys deployed to Southeast Asia across all branches. Army UH-1 helicopters alone accumulated more than 10.7 million flight hours from the mid-1960s through the end of the war. Add the AH-1 Cobra, which shared the Huey's engine, rotor, and transmission. Together, the Huey family logged more combat flight time than any aircraft in the history of warfare. That figure comes from the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association's own records. Not an estimate, not a rounded number from a press release. Tail numbers and flight logs were cross-referenced and counted. November 14, 1965. Lieutenant Colonel Hal Moore's 1st Battalion, 7th Cavalry loads into Hueys and lifts off toward a clearing in the Ia Drang Valley, 37 miles west of Pleiku. 3 North Vietnamese Army regiments are waiting. Moore knows it. Intelligence intercepts had picked up enemy movement before first light. He goes anyway. The first wave of 16 helicopters touches down at landing zone X-ray just before 11 in the morning. Within the hour, American troops are in contact with a force that outnumbers them nearly 3-1. The North Vietnamese close the distance fast, knowing that staying tight to the American lines neutralizes the firepower advantage. Hueys fly in ammunition under direct fire. They fly out wounded under the same fire. Major Bruce Crandall makes run after run into X-ray without being ordered to. His aircraft is shot through, his crew wounded. He goes back anyway. The battle that follows becomes the first large-scale AIR assault in the history of warfare. Troops are inserted directly into a hot landing zone while under contact. They are resupplied by air, and their wounded are evacuated by air, all from a machine that had not existed a decade before. It works, and it sets the template for every air assault operation that follows, in Vietnam, in the Gulf, in Afghanistan, and in every conflict the United States fights for the next 60 years. The medevac version, call sign Dustoff, becomes its own legend. Nearly 900,000 patients are transported by medevac helicopters over the course of the Vietnam War, compared to 17,700 in Korea. The average time between a soldier sustaining a wound and arriving at a surgical facility drops to under 1 hour, anywhere in country. The mortality rate among the wounded falls to less than 1 in every 100 casualties. That number, less than 1 in 100, is what a machine that can locate a wounded soldier, fly to his position, land in a jungle clearing under fire, and get him to a surgical table inside 60 minutes actually means in human terms. It isn't a statistic. It's the difference between dying in the field and living long enough for a surgeon to work on you. It is the most important number in the entire history of this aircraft. Pilots flying Dustoff missions averaged, by the accounts of veterans and historians, between 100 and 140 flight hours per month at peak operations. The average Army pilot during World War II flew roughly 40. The Huey's crews weren't flying combat hours, they were living in them. We're halfway through the Huey's story, and the numbers we're about to hit are unlike anything you've seen. Before we get there, if history's most legendary machines are your thing, this channel is exactly where you need to be. Subscribe now and hit the bell. New videos drop every week, and you don't want to find out about them late. Now, back to Vietnam. You're in the left seat. The collective is in your left hand, the cyclic in your right, the anti-torque pedals under your feet. Every input affects every other input simultaneously. Push the collective up, and the nose wants to pull left. You compensate on the pedals. The cyclic corrects the drift. The helicopter is not flying itself. You are flying it. Every second. All of it at once. There is no autopilot. There is no moment you release the controls and think. At peak operations, you fly 120 hours a month, and then you do it again. Your door gunner is behind you on the M60. You're at treetop level, bleeding off airspeed as the tree line thins. The landing zone is a rice paddy with a berm on the north side where the rounds are coming from. Your co-pilot calls the tracer line. You've got 6 wounded on the ground, and 20 seconds before the next burst finds you. You go in anyway. That is not a dramatization. That is the standard dust-off approach. Major Bruce Crandall, who flew more than 20 resupply and evacuation sorties directly into landing zone X-ray at Ia Drang under continuous fire in a helicopter with no armor plating worth mentioning, was awarded the Medal of Honor 42 years later. He said afterward, "The Huey was the best helicopter ever made." We saved so many more people because of that helicopter. The airframe itself is aluminium, thin gauge aluminium. The North Vietnamese knew it. On some documented occasions, enemy forces deliberately let American infantry units pass in order to wait for the Huey that would come to extract them. A single AK-47 round through the right place could put a Huey down. The crews knew that too. Many pilots chose to sit on their body armor rather than wear it because protection from ground fire coming up through the floor was more useful than protection from fire coming in at chest height. Crew chiefs and door gunners flew with what veterans called chicken plate, ceramic chest armor. But the most dangerous direction was always below. Of the approximately 7,000 Hueys deployed to Southeast Asia, over 3,300 were destroyed to enemy action, accidents, mechanical failure, and the cumulative punishment of flying over 100,000 sorties in a decade-long war. Over 10% of all combat and combat support deaths in Vietnam occurred in helicopter operations. 2,165 helicopter pilots were killed. 2,712 non-pilot crew members were killed. The North Vietnamese did not just shoot at Hueys because they were available targets. They shot at them because destroying one Huey could strand a platoon, cut a supply line, and leave 6 wounded men in a paddy field with no way out. It was a machine worth killing. At $250,000 per airframe in 1966, the cost of one Huey, the United States was buying something no other machine on Earth could deliver. The Huey is one of the most decorated aircraft platforms in United States military history. It served in the armed forces of 34 nations. Bell and its licensees produced more than 16,000 helicopters in the Huey family, making it the second most produced American military aircraft in history, behind only the consolidated B-24 Liberator. The Huey sits above the B-17, above the F-86, above every jet fighter the Cold War produced. No other rotary wing aircraft in history comes close. The sound itself became a weapon. The 2-blade semi-rigid rotor creates a distinctive, low-frequency beat, whop, 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 caused by the way the blades interact with their own wake as they rotate. No other helicopter produces that sound. It carries through jungle canopy and across valley floors before the aircraft is ever visible. Veterans on both sides of the conflict describe hearing it before seeing it. American troops heard it and knew help was coming. Everyone else heard it and made a different calculation entirely. Francis Ford Coppola put that sound in the opening of Apocalypse Now and never once explained it. He did not need to explain it. Audiences in 1979 knew exactly what they were hearing. They still do. The Huey's direct descendant is still flying. The Bell UH-1Y Venom, designated Yankee, entered service with the United States Marine Corps in 2008 and is currently the Corps' primary utility helicopter. Built under the H-1 upgrade program, awarded to Bell in 1996, the Venom replaced the older UH-1N twin Huey fleet with a completely redesigned four-blade composite rotor system. Twin General Electric T700 turboshaft engines producing over 3,600 shaft horsepower combined, a 170% increase in payload over its predecessor, and nearly 50% greater range. The fuselage shares 84% component commonality with the AH-1Z Viper attack helicopter, driving down maintenance costs across the entire marine aviation fleet. The Czech Republic took delivery of its first Venom in 2023. The Huey family has been in continuous production for nearly 70 years. Bell's commercial variants, the 212 and 412, are still flying cargo, search and rescue, and offshore oil missions worldwide. The medevac procedures developed by dust-off crews in the jungles of Vietnam remain the global standard for military and civilian helicopter emergency medicine. The air assault doctrine built around the Huey's capabilities is the framework for every major heliborne operation since. The AH-1 Cobra, the world's first purpose-built attack helicopter, was a direct derivative sharing the Huey's entire drivetrain. Every time a Marine helicopter lands on a contested beach, every time a medevac crew reaches a wounded soldier in under 60 minutes, every time a commander moves troops by air into terrain where roads do not exist, that methodology traces directly back to what those crews figured out in Vietnam, in that thin aluminum airframe at treetop level, under fire. In 1956, two engineers at Bell built a prototype to answer an Army contract. One turbine engine, a semi-rigid two-blade rotor, an aluminum airframe light enough to lift 14 soldiers out of a jungle in one trip. That machine became the most important rotary wing aircraft ever built. It flew 900,000 wounded men to hospitals. It proved that an army could fight differently, faster, more flexibly, from the air instead of the ground. It changed the survival odds for every wounded soldier who came after it. It spawned a generation of doctrine, a lineage of aircraft, and a sound so distinctive it needed no explanation to anyone who had ever heard it once. And somewhere in the world right now, one is on approach to a landing zone. The Huey didn't just survive history, it made it, and nearly 70 years later, it's still making it. If this video gave you something, a fact, a moment, a feeling, then you already know this is where you belong. Subscribe, share this with someone who needs to hear the legend, and drop a comment below. What machine should we cover next? The best suggestions actually become videos. We'll see you in the next one.